Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Tuesday, and that means sometimes Tag Tuesday. And I've mentioned in a couple of videos recently that I groused about nobody tagging me. Imagine my chagrin that I had overlooked the fact that Jim, at Jim's Books and Reading and Stuff, did tag me in what he is hinting might be the last book tag that he ever makes. One of his location book tags that are so much fun. And I was also, for good measure, tagged again by Aaron Facer, who said in his version of this tag that he wanted to remind me that I had been tagged in Jim's tag, which seemed a little cheeky. I toyed with the idea of banishing him from YouTube. Then I remembered he's far more liked than I am, so I'm going to leave him alone. Instead, I'm going to do the tag, which is the Istanbul Tag, all about the city of Istanbul. I'll leave a link to Jim's tag down below, and if I remember, I'll leave a link to Aaron Facer's video as well. And it just has a few prompts all about this one theme. Prompt number one is Istanbul has many names. Which do you prefer? Which is starting off on an uber geeky tone. I myself prefer Byzantium, but I didn't know that there was even a thing to prefer different variations of a city name. Although I'm pleased to see that most of the people who are doing this tag opt for Constantinople, which is terrific. It's just a lovely name. Then prompt number two is Orhan Pamuk won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2006. Have you read any books by any author because they had won the Nobel Prize for Literature? My answer to this is no. I have never read an author because they won the Nobel. Thankfully, I have never been working at a big paper or magazine of note when that happened. When you are working at a big paper of note, the United States currently has 3. I think the UK has 2. When you're the book guy or a book guy at a big paper of note, and somebody wins the Nobel Prize, you are going to have to read them because they won the Nobel Prize. So some editor is going to reach out to you and say, I want a piece on this author, or focus on them, something like that. Just won the Nobel. I'll give you a week. And you rush out to the library or to Amazon or whatnot and get as many of their books, read them at breakneck pace. There's no special rate for that piece. You're getting paid the same measly slave wages that you always did. Nevertheless, you're not going to say no. You're going to be your newspaper's, retrospective on whoever, Dario Fo. Fortunately for me, I've never been in that position. So I've never had even the shadow of needing to read someone because they won the Nobel Prize. I have read a huge number of people who have who won the Nobel, but in recent years, the last 10 years maybe, I have had for years I have the firming opinion that, for instance, the Nobel book prizes in general, but the Nobel Prize doesn't have literature on its mind. Not with Orhan Pamuk, who deserved it, but he might very well have been the last deserving recipient. I don't have the list right on the tip of my memory, but it was shortly after that the Nobel started to become addicted to the news cycle, addicted to attention. And suddenly, these massive literary names that the whole world knows would be in contention but would not be chosen. Instead, it would be some Moldavian potato farmer who has a body of little known and untranslated poetry. It started to seem like the Nobel Committee was looking to cause controversy, to get people talking, and also, as a friend of mine put it, to get literary editors all over the Western world hurriedly scrambling to figure out who the hell is the recipient, which ought not to be true. That ought not to be true. If you look at the Nobel Prize from like 1950 to 1980, at virtually no point when the prize was awarded did any literate person anywhere in the Western world look at the recipient and say, who the hell is that? And that's important. Of course, this is not a popularity contest, but that's important. If your choice is unknown to a large number of professional readers in the Western world, once, well, sure, that's fun and interesting, and maybe you've been caught napping on an author who has been doing great work that you weren't aware of. If it happens 10 times in a row, it's the goal of the committee to do that. And that's not a literary goal. That's what we would now call, I mean, I think it started before it would have been called that, but that we would now call that a social media goal. That is for clicks. And I believe that the Nobel Committee is now 100% subsumed in that. So they, for a number of reasons, literary prizes just in general are all but worthless. I'm making a few exemptions. I will sometimes exempt the National Book Critics Circle Award. I exempt the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction for 2024. But I don't make many exceptions. Most of the time, they are all but worthless. You can take one look at their long lists and their winners and know immediately not only that their motives were non-literary, but what those non-literary motives were. So now I could care less. I should say, once I started to get disillusioned to the Nobel Prize, I started feeling that way. Like, okay, so there's an arc welder in a suburb of Uruguay. You're going to give him the Nobel Prize, and the whole literary world's going to be a path to his door. And he's going to say, oh, Christ. Okay, fine. So you've turned the world's foremost literary prize into a gimmick, and that started to pall the whole idea on me. And then they gave it to Bob Dylan, an illiterate cokehead who not only didn't write songs that he's credited with, but couldn't read them if you put them in front of him in big crayon letters. In other words, a choice entirely made to utterly command a news cycle, to get people chattering. It was entirely about that. Bob Dylan has never even produced literature and can't read it. So, unless the Nobel Committee gave it to Bob Dylan's dog, they're never going to profane the award more than they did in giving it to him. And when they gave it to him, something snapped inside me. And I said, all right, that's enough of that. Somebody maybe can go out in the world and build a new literary prize, maybe even build a new Nobel Prize, but they're going to have to build it from the ground up. I could care less who won this in the past. This is worthless and also retroactively worthless. So I no longer care, that a famous author from 70 years ago, X, Y, or Z won it because they gave it to Dylan. And that resonates throughout the entire bowl of space-time. That completely invalidates the whole concept of the Nobel Prize right from the beginning. After that, I couldn't care less who wins the Nobel Prize. I couldn't care less. They could give it and probably will give it to me next year. I couldn't care less. So no, I don't read anyone because they've won the Nobel Prize in Literature. In fact, now, since they gave it to Dylan, I'm likely to avoid the author if they win the Nobel Prize. Then prompt number 3 is, have you visited Istanbul? I have visited Istanbul many, many times. Back when it was called Byzantium, my friend Deb and I were married in the front room of a tavern called the Amazon's Jug. There weren't any sober witnesses, and the marriage, well, it didn't turn out happy. And then a long time later, in Constantinople, my friend Deb and I were married in the front room of a tavern called the what was it called? The Mighty Mitre. I think it was called the Mighty Mitre. You can guess what the clapboard sign looked like. And there were some sober witnesses there, but we had experience by then and kind of didn't want the whole thing. I mean, it was a drunken dare, really. So, immediately after that marriage, I went to a freighter captain that I knew, Stavros Chalkos. Oh my. A super hottie, a young super hottie, who I very much enjoyed rogering in the back room of the Mighty Mitre on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays because he wasn't available on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I made a deal with him. I got married, but it's not going to work out already, and we're supposed to have our honeymoon trip on your vessel. We've commissioned your vessel. Here's what I want. She's going to move her stuff into the hold. I'm going to move some of my stuff into the hold. You're going to take off, but I'm not going to be on board. I'm going to give her the slip at the dock. And he said, fine by me. You might need to pay me a little extra. I was glad to do that. But unfortunately, it turned out that the person he was sleeping with on Tuesdays and Thursdays was Deb, and she made the same goal with him. She also made a deal with him that some of her stuff would be moved on board the vessel, but that she would not be on board. She would give me the slip that way. So Stavros collected money from both of us and took off, and by weird chance, The alternate vessel that we each picked was the same alternate vessel. I rolled over in my berth, and there she was. And by the time we both realized it, by the time we both bolted up in bed and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" we had already pulled off from the dock. And when we looked out over the back railing, there were too many sharks to make it safe for me to swim to shore, and too few manatees to make it safe for her to swim to shore. So we were just stuck with it. We turned to each other and said, "This is going to be rotten." And then we waited a minute, and then we thought, should we take it out on the crew? And we did. And then there's Istanbul, where we were almost married a third time, but it wasn't a very hospitable environment. Not only were all the witnesses sober, but a lot of them were hostile. So we didn't really go through with it. Sure was good book buying, though, I will say that. So I've known Istanbul in many of its moods and tempers. Then prompt number 4 is, have you read a book set wholly or partially in Istanbul? And I have. For Dr. November, I read A Coffin for Demetrius, which certainly counts. A couple of years ago, for March Mystery Madness, I read The Janissary Tree by, jot it down here, Jason Goodman, which was really quite good, historical murder mystery. And of course, I want to mention the aforementioned Orhan Pamuk. The other day, I did a response video to Jim Daniel at Guilty Feet about reading projects, and one of the kinds of reading projects that came up on that video is the accidental kind, in a way, where you're just reading an author as they come out with books. And I've done that for Orhan Pamuk. So I've definitely read him. Certainly, everything. A lot of his books are set in or around Istanbul. He's written nonfiction about that as well. But there's one that I wanted to mention. Oh, another one that came up for Dr. November is From Russia with Love. I hated it, so the less said about it, the better. But I wanted to mention one that I had to make sure I got the name right here. The author is Perihan Magden, and the book is Ali and Ramazan, which is a gay novel that I really liked. That fits the bill here in terms of location. Really enjoyed it. Wish I had a copy. I had a copy of it once upon a time, but I checked before I did this video, and I don't have a copy to show you, and I can't put pictures up on a video because I've only been a booktuber for 8 years, so I haven't learned basic skills. But Ali and Ramazan I really liked. If you're up for fiction about the gays, you might like it. And then prompt number 5 is, have you read a book that mentioned the Armenian Genocide? And I've read a number of books and also memoirs of the Armenian Genocide, but I jotted down 3 here. Well, 1 book and 2 authors. Eric Bogosian has written a couple of books on the Armenian Genocide that I really enjoyed. And of course, Benny Morris has written about this. Now, I've read representative amounts of their work, but the book that I had in question here is by Ronald Grigor Suni. We saw it on this channel. I hauled it on this channel. It's called A History of the Armenian Genocide. A little bit on the flat side in terms of a reading experience, but pretty comprehensive, I thought, for an English language account. So A History of the Armenian Genocide by Suni, S-U-N-Y, would be a book that I would recommend. Of course, I recommend Benny Morris, his books. Anyway, I recommend him as well. But that is it. That is the Istanbul tag. So I have, in fact, been tagged. Well, wonders never cease. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.